Apprenticeship, Learning to Love, Serve, and Be Like Jesus with Rebeca and Douglas Pereira.
What is an apprentice? An apprentice is more than a student. They do more than learn. They gain more than head knowledge. An apprentice draws near to the master. They listen carefully to what the master says. They watch closely what the master does. Then they practice it. Again and again, they practice what they've seen and heard to come as close as possible to the master's mind and skill. That is why we want to be apprentices of Jesus. We want to move beyond mere head knowledge about Jesus and his kingdom. To do that, we will draw close to him. We will listen and watch, and we will practice. As we do this, we will be transformed. We will truly love, serve, and be like him. This is what the apprenticeship is all about.
Hello, and welcome to the Apprenticeship. I'm Olivia, and I'm an apprentice of Jesus. I'm learning how to love, serve, and be like Jesus from my parents and the hosts of the show, Rebeca and Douglas Pereira. We need to know Jesus well if we're going to love, serve, and be like him. In the apprenticeship, we'll spend time walking in his footsteps so we can understand Jesus' heart. As an apprentice of Jesus, I follow the apprentice's creed. You must love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your being, with all your mind, and with all your strength. Love others as well as you love yourself. Thank you for joining us today. Don't forget the study guide for today's episode. You can find it on our website or by scanning the QR code. I know we're going to learn so much together.
In his footsteps.
They say that to truly know someone, you need to walk a mile in their shoes. But what does that really mean? It means understanding them, where they come from, what experiences they've had, and where they're heading, what they hope for, what they work for. It means discovering what is important to them and why. It means knowing their heart, what delights them, what fulfills them, and what pains them. This is truly knowing someone, and this is how we want to know Jesus. We can't walk a literal mile in his shoes, but we can retrace his footsteps in the Gospels. He has shared his story and his mission with us, and he has opened his heart to us. To truly love, serve, and be like Jesus, we need to know him, to really know him. This is what In His Footsteps is all about.
Welcome back to the Apprenticeship. We are on a journey to love, serve, and be like Jesus.
We begin this journey with the book of Luke. Today, we focus on the foretelling of John the Baptist's birth. You can find it in Luke chapter 1, verses 5 to 25.
Sadly, we will not have time to read the entire passage together, so I encourage you to read it. You can use this week's study guide to deepen your understanding.
But we have a key verse, right, Douglas?
That's right, Rebecca. Our memory verse for this week is Luke chapter 1, verse 6. Our son, Christopher, will read for us.
Zachariah and Elizabeth were righteous in God's eyes, careful to obey all of the Lord's commandments and regulations.
Since we can't read the whole passage, I'll summarize the story. Zechariah was a priest. He was chosen by Lot to offer incense in the sanctuary. That's when the angel Gabriel appeared to tell him that he would have a son who would be the announcer of the Messiah. Zechariah was full of doubt, and as a result, he became mute for the pregnancy and birth of his son.
That was a very good summary, Rebecca.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
This story is very familiar, but we can still learn a lot from it.
For starters, we can look at the meaning of the names, Zachariah and Elizabeth. Zachariah means God remembers, and Elizabeth means my God has sworn, or my God is abundance. Their names signal to us that God remembers his promises. Even though it has been 400 years since a prophet spoke in Israel, God still remembers. And now things are about to get real.
And there are clues in the story that point to that, aren't there? These clues link this event with these prophecies in the Old Testament.
That's true, Rebecca. The opening lines in verse 5 are written in a style like many of the Old Testament prophetic books, like Isaiah, Jeremiah, Hosea. In verse 17, Gabriel quotes the last promise from the last prophet, Malachi, before the 400 years of silence between the Old and New Testaments. And even the presence of Gabriel is meaningful. The last time he appeared was to help Daniel understand God's vision about the future.
All these clues seem to be hinting at something.
That's right. They are highlighting that the stories in Luke didn't happen out of the blue. They are part of a larger divine plan. Luke is setting the story of Zachariah, Elizabeth, and John into the larger narrative of God's dealing with Israel and his plans for the whole world.
How exciting for Zechariah. He probably knew all these references. He would have known the promises and prophecies. And now, Gabriel tells him he's part of the plan.
Unfortunately, Zachariah does not seem excited, at least not at first. Look at verse 13. What does Gabriel have to say first?
Don't be afraid. It reminds me of all the times when God had to say, don't be afraid, before he could say anything else.
That repetition really brings home that God is not someone to fear.
That's so true, Douglas. God is not someone to fear, but he's someone to believe. Which in verse 18, we see Zechariah does not at first. He reveals something unexpected in his heart. He asks, how can I be sure this will happen? This question is loaded with doubt. Almost like he's asking for a sign, because the angel Gabriel coming from God's presence isn't enough of a sign. It's so surprising.
As a priest, he would have known the story of Abraham and Sarah giving birth to Isaac long after it was too late. If anyone could believe that God could do the impossible, it seems Zechariah would, but he does not.
Instead, he shows a kind of atheism. It's a hidden kind. It says, yes, there's a God, but it doesn't leave room for God to be a reality in the person's life. It's knowing, but not truly believing. Since he was a priest, we can safely assume that Zechariah knew much, yet he believed little.
But with God, we can know what we believe and believe what we know.
That reminds me of last week's memory verse in Luke chapter 1, verse 4. So you can be certain of the truth of everything you were taught. This week's memory verse in Luke chapter 1, verse 6. Before we see Zechariah's surprising lack of faith, we're told that God saw him and Elizabeth as righteous. The stage is set for us to think that Zechariah is a spiritual role model, which makes his lack of faith all the more shocking. But I don't think God was surprised by Zechariah's initial lack of faith.
Not a chance. So does this mean God still saw Zechariah in a positive light, even while knowing he would struggle to believe?
I think so. God is merciful and forgiving. He doesn't give up on his children. He sees what we are and what we can become. He continuously works in our lives for our good.
That is so encouraging. God sees what we are and what we can become. He wants to help us reach our potential. What are the ways God is working in our lives? And for what purpose? We will answer these questions right after this break.
Thank you for joining us on The Apprenticeship. We hope you are enjoying the show and its resources. You know, The Apprenticeship and its resources wouldn't be possible without Agents of Hope. You may be wondering, who are Agents of Hope? Well, they're people who are committed to sharing our hope in Jesus. They believe in the vision of Hope Channel Canada and support this ministry. Through their support, Agents of Hope make programming like The Apprenticeship possible. Their support means uplifting content can reach Canadians wherever they are. Would you like to help us? You can become an Agent of Hope too. You can visit the website or scan the QR code. Together we can share with Canada that there's more to life, and it's found in Jesus.
In his workshop.
A workshop is where things are made. They are shaped according to a vision, to a plan. A workshop is also where broken things are restored. They are transformed, put back together. They're made useful and beautiful again. Jesus is the master craftsman. He invites us into his workshop. Here, Jesus wields his tools with expert skill, working in us. He shapes us into the people he designed us to be. He repairs our broken places. He restores his image in us. And he prepares us for the unique mission that is ours alone to fulfill. We must enter his workshop and allow him to work in us, and we must participate. Only then can we be transformed from the inside out. This is what In His Workshop is all about.
Before he began his ministry, Jesus was a carpenter. He was in his workshop, transforming pieces of wood into beautiful and useful items.
Perhaps it's not a coincidence that he was a carpenter. It is a beautiful allusion to what he would do during his ministry. He transformed wood and then he shaped people.
That's right, Rebecca. And he continues to shape people today.
The word shape gives the idea of a process over time. It took time and a plan to shape wood into what Jesus intended it to be. We could say the same about us.
Absolutely. He has a plan for each of us. With great care and attention to detail, he's shaping us into who he knows we can be so we can do what he knows we can do.
Paul says in Ephesians, "For we are God's masterpiece. He has created us anew in Christ Jesus, so we can do the good things he planned for us long ago."
David recognized that God has a plan, that his plan is good, and that he offers to guide us. David wrote, "The Lord says, I'll guide you along the best pathway for your life. I will advise you and watch over you." When we enter his workshop, we find the one who is shaping us according to his divine plan. But you know, there's a point where the carpentry analogy breaks down.
Where's that?
Wood is unaware of how it's being shaped or why. But God bless us with awareness. We can perceive and understand. We can cooperate or not. We can choose to understand and lean into God's plan for us or not.
That is so true, Douglas. The choice is ours. And it is a critical choice. It impacts our lives and those we influence. It is so important to recognize what God is doing in our lives.
I can think of 3 benefits of recognizing God's activity in our lives. 1, it helps us recognize that God is sovereign in our lives. Whatever choices we make, whatever happens to us, God never quits drawing us to Him and shaping us into who He created us to be.
That can actually be an incredible source of peace. When we remember that God is sovereign, we can have peace at any point in our journey. We can rest assured that He is at work in our lives. He hasn't forgotten. He's still present and active, working for our good.
Exactly. We can recognize what He's doing in our lives. He does not intend for it to be some great mystery. If you think about it, that would be very inefficient and even ineffective. And since we can be aware of what God is doing, we can become proactive in our development. This is the second benefit of recognizing God's activity in our lives. We can learn to see our life journey through His eyes, and then we can join Him in what He's trying to do in our lives.
That sounds very exciting. It reminds me of what Solomon wrote in Proverbs. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Do not depend on your own understanding. Seek His will in all you do, and He will show you which path to take. Solomon believed God has a plan and that we can be aware of it. He counsels us to be very proactive.
Exactly. The third benefit of recognizing God's activity raises our viewpoint from ourselves to others. The benefit is we can recognize God's shaping activity in others. If I'm a work in progress, then so is the next person. I am reminded to live with grace towards others.
You know, there's a note saying, be patient with me. God's not finished with me yet.
I hear you. And perhaps God is calling me to help someone see what He's doing in their lives. When I recognize God's activity in others, I can better support them through whatever season they are in. I can better help them work towards God and His purpose rather than away.
That is so powerful. Next time, we'll talk about what it means to be created in the image of God and how He helps us understand God's purpose for us. We'll also discuss how we can become more aware of God's work in our lives. As we spend time in His workshop, we'll become more clued into God's sovereign work. It's a lifelong journey. We're so happy to be part of it with you.
Before we move on, I want to give you a challenge. Between now and the next time, I challenge you to consider these key questions. What is God doing in my life? Do I have the courage to be part of His work? Am I truly willing to join Him in His work of redemption in my life and all around me?
On the apprenticeship, we're all about learning. We're focusing on how to love, serve, and be like Jesus. But maybe there's more you'd like to know. Well, did you know that Hope Channel has a learning platform? It's called Hope Study. Hope Study offers courses that connect real life with faith. The studies answers questions like, does God exist? What is the purpose of life? Can I trust the Bible? What happens after death? Why is there suffering? Can I really change? Hope Study is a place to explore life's most profound questions with answers from a biblical perspective. Through Hope Study, you'll discover the Bible's truths and how they can enrich your life, and it's all completely free. I hope you take a look. You can visit our website or scan the QR code.
The Rescue Worker.
Stories of daring rescues capture our attention. The selfless rescuers inspire us with their determination to save others. Their actions challenge us to ask, would I have done the same? Jesus is the ultimate daring, determined, and selfless rescuer. He put it all on the line for us. He held nothing back, but gave everything to save us, the ones He loves. And He asks us, would you do the same for the others I love? Jesus invites us to join His rescue efforts, to bring people back from the brink to the safety of His love and kingdom. But how do we do that? What does it take to be a rescue worker for God's kingdom? That is what Rescue Workers is all about.
The terrorist attacks of 9/11 illustrate the worst in humanity. But on that day, we also saw what is the best in people. Rick Rescorla was a security guard at the Twin Towers. He had a background in the military and intelligence. Because of this, he suspected that the towers would be a target for terrorism. He drilled more than 2,000 employees in the second tower of evacuation procedures. Some of them grumbled, but they had to cooperate. When the first plane struck the first tower, Rick sprang into action. He instructed employees in the building to evacuate. All the drills proved to help. Then, a plane crashed into his tower. When it seemed that all the people were out, Rick ran upstairs to check each floor for anyone left behind. He didn't make it out before the building collapsed. But because of him, 2,700 people survived that day.
What Rick did is incredible. He disregarded the natural human instinct to self-preserve. He put his life on the line to rescue others. It reminds me of God. The worst terrorist attack on humanity is sin. We're not made for sin or death, yet we are trapped in the collapsing building of our reality. But God entered this falling building to rescue us. He knew it would cost his life. Through his sacrifice, everyone who chooses him will not be crushed by sin.
That's right. He rescues us from the influence and consequences of sin. Imagine sin no longer having a grip on you. That's what Jesus rescues us from.
He's transforming us from the inside out. But this transformation is not for our benefit only. He invites us to be his rescue workers, to be used by him to help others in their transformation process. So, how can we be rescue workers with God? Well, we can look at the acronym RESCUE. Following this acronym, we will learn how God can use us in this life-saving work. We start with R, which is for roots. Jesus came to rescue the relationship between God and us. He made a way for that relationship to be restored. To benefit from that, I need to root myself in Jesus. I need to align myself with God and pursue a real relationship with him.
Jesus taught this important truth in his parable of the sower. It is recorded in Matthew 13. He mentions that some seeds fell in places where they couldn't put down deep roots. Those seeds failed. But some seeds fell on fertile soil and produced an immense crop. To me, fertile soil and a good crop imply that those seeds put down deep roots.
Only the seeds with deep roots could grow into what they were meant to be.
And just like plants, we grow from our roots. This brings us to E for edification. Jesus came to rescue and restore God's image in us. To receive that kind of rescue, I need to align my innermost self with God, his truth, and his kingdom values.
Jesus defined our innermost self during his ministry. He said, "You must love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment."
So, our edification is the process of aligning our heart, soul, and mind with God.
Precisely. And doing that empowers us to fulfill the second greatest commandment according to Jesus. A second commandment is equally important. Love your neighbors as yourself. Which brings me to S for service. Jesus came to rescue God's purpose for me. He empowers me to serve. I need to align my hands with God's hands.
And while we each have a unique, God-given service, we don't have to feel or live like we're alone. C is for community. Jesus came to rescue God's intention for unity and fellowship among humans.
One of Jesus' personal prayers is recorded in the Bible. In that prayer, we see he longed for something for all his disciples. He said, I pray that they will all be one, just as you and I are one. As you are in me, Father, and I am in you. And may they be in us, that the world will believe you sent me.
It seems that unity is for our benefit and for the benefit of others, so that the world will believe that God sent Jesus.
Yes, community is so important. So I need to align myself with God's other rescue workers and the community around me.
We're nearing the end of the acronym. U is for upbringing. Jesus came to rescue our healthy development. I need to align my development with his shaping and transformation.
And finally, E is for evangelism. Jesus calls me to participate in his rescue work. Paul wrote, For God was in Christ, reconciling the world to himself, no longer counting people's sin against them. And he gave us this wonderful message of reconciliation. So we are Christ's ambassadors. God is making his appeal through us. We speak for Christ when we plead, come back to God. I can be most effective as a rescue worker when I align my heart with God's heart.
I know that is a lot of information. Maybe it has raised more questions than answers. But don't worry. In our coming episodes, we'll work through each point.
It is truly amazing that the God of the universe would enlist our help in rescuing others. I'm excited to learn together how we can be effective rescue workers.
We will begin next week with Roots.
Thank you so much for joining us today on the episode of The Apprenticeship. Rebecca and Douglas covered a lot of information. Do you wish you could go back and look at it again? Maybe study the topics more? Well, you can. This episode has a study guide. You can find it on the website or by scanning the QR code. It will help you review the points and go even deeper into these topics. We hope you've been blessed today. We look forward to seeing you again next week.